The thing that Terry had, yes, I'll continue there, was the guidelines and the 5-year projection do not include it. They do not include capital outlay has not been passed, or at least up until a year or so ago. I don't know whether that's changed or not, but they did not include capital outlay that had not been approved by a town meeting.
Right. Carl, I just added that highlighted part, annual guidelines and 5-year projections, because I think it only said projections. And so.
Well, that's the 5-year projection. It did, the 5-year projection of taxes did not include any any capital projects that had not been approved by town meeting.
Right.
So even, in that process up until getting to town meeting, they were not being counted.
Correct.
Now, I don't know, Kerry, I don't know whether that's changed or not.
It has not changed.
Yeah, well, that's a problem, But
right.
with the capital planning committee, there'll be a possibility of somehow getting that.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify, Carl, when the minute said projections, it wasn't clear what you were talking about, so I added those highlighted words. Is that okay?
Yeah, so that was the 5-year projection that the finance committee is tasked with producing every year.
Right.
Okay, so we concur that the edits highlighted in yellow, we accept. Is that correct?
Well, I guess I would just say capital outlay projections that have not been approved by town meeting yet.
Okay, so let's change it to be, Mr. Packard commented that Finance Committee capital projections.
Yeah, the highlighted thing, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then up to the capital outlay projections. And then after that, have not been approved by town meeting yet.
Not approved. Okay, not yet approved.
Good, that's better. Yep.
By town meeting. Okay, thank you.
So Lisa, I think you got that better than I did.
I'll send it to you if that's.
I roughly followed it, but not entirely.
Okay.
Sorry.
And I would like to delete the word "were" in the last paragraph, the first sentence, so that it will read, "The forum went well." So I'll send that to you as well. Other edits?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then if no other edits, is there a motion to approve the minutes of December 16th as revised?
I move to approve the minutes of the meeting of December 16th as revised.
Thank you.
Second.
And a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Stephen
All
Grant, aye.
opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining because I wasn't at the meeting.
Okay, Carrie abstains. Thank you. We'll move on to the minutes of January 6th. Are there edits to these minutes? So I'd like to propose that in the sentence that says, in the paragraph, 1, 2, 3, fifth paragraph that starts, Ms. Woodward reviewed her task, in the last sentence that says, also the TBA architect's document regarding Concord facilities, I propose that we should add the phrase is in draft form. Okay.
And I say the transcript does help.
Yes, okay.
It's not, it's sort of, it's inline transcript. I think there's a way to export it, but I didn't. But yeah, it was helpful.
That's great.
Yeah.
Parashar, welcome.
Sorry about that, a little delay.
We expected you in 20 minutes, so you're ahead of schedule. All right, are there other edits to the January 6th minutes? If not, then is there a motion to approve them as with that phrase added?
So moved.
And a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Okay.
All opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. They're approved. All right. Then before I share my screen, I'd like to point out that our next meeting is scheduled for February 17th, which is school vacation week. So is it agreeable to this task force to meet on the 17th?
I will not be available.
Jared
That
is away, okay,
And I don't think Laurie will either.
okay. You have a better offer.
I have parenting. I'll have my kids that whole week and I think we'll go on day trips.
Super, okay. All right, otherwise, then we'll go ahead and schedule a meeting. Yeah, Terry,
I have my grandkids that week. I think somebody else is watching them that afternoon, but I'm kind of iffy, I guess.
We can watch them for you through Zoom if you're interested.
All right.
Yeah, I was gonna say, they can come during the meeting.
Oh, no.
so in the interest of moving our work forward, I'm going to propose that we plan to meet on the 17th. And please let me know if something happens besides Jared and Laurie, if you cannot attend, and if we turn out to be quorum challenge, we'll dodge it. Okay, so I put I put everything in a PowerPoint, and I'm hoping to share it. Let's see if I have the privilege to share my screen. Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. Okay,
Okay.
share. Can you see that? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Here's our agenda. The plan here is to first review the proposed recommendations, review details of the enhanced process for capital planning for town and schools. I've included information that, a description that Stephen and Laurie sent me. We'll talk about additional information that's required, and in that category, we'll discuss the template that Terry and Carrie have been working on. And then we will review the pros and cons of the capital planning standing committee. Then I hope we will be ready to vote on these proposed recommendations. Move on to discuss whether we think this task force will want to propose a warrant article, and then public comment. So just a reminder, this is the goals and requirements of the charge for this task force to define very large projects. I have our criteria for evaluating timing and prioritizing projects. Be sure we include protecting from climate impacts, balancing competing priorities, balancing affordability, and smoothing the debt obligation, and providing a template to track projects that will be completed annually. So I think we've made great progress, and we're well on our way to being ready to write a report that describes all this work. Here are the recommendations. Our recommendations for the very large project was the $5 million, or any project that is has 2 or more phases totaling $5 million. You remember we got a question about this $5 million limit at the public forum. So I guess I would like to confirm or ask, does anyone think that we should adjust this definition, or are we still confident in maintaining it? Has anything changed in anybody's mind about this? Yeah, Terry.
Okay, well, I originally recommended 3 million. And Hugh Lauer, who was on the committee at the time, wanted 10 or 20 million. So this was kind of a compromise.
Mhm.
And since Carl and maybe Parashar weren't with us at the time, I'm just wondering if you guys are comfortable with 5 million and you agree more with Hugh Lauer, or if you think we should discuss it again.
I think the projects that we're concerned with that have an effect, major effect on taxes and can cause increases, sharp increases over a few years are at least 5 million. So I wouldn't go below 5 million to me, but 5 million, could see if that works, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm comfortable with 5 million. I certainly wouldn't go with 10 million or 20 million. Because clearly I think there's a perspective in the town that rightly or wrongly sort of projects kind of run away from
mhm.
citizens. And so I think having 5 million makes sense. Now, having said that, I wasn't ready to answer the question, but I apologize. But I haven't looked back over the last 2 or 3 years and see how many would be captured if it was 5 million, whether whether it's 0 or whether it's 5, and whether that's the right kind of projects. But I think 5 million sounds about right.
Parashar, I think to answer your question, we could do a thorough look back, but I think the two that would be captured would be Giroux and White Pond.
Yeah, okay.
And
Okay,
that's the reason for the phasing too. We had a long discussion about,
Yeah,
Yeah. And so the question is, at 3 million, would you have captured any more?
No.
Next question. And if not, maybe we just leave it at 5
I
million.
don't know what you would consider Junction Village. It's not really a town, but we sunk, didn't we sink 3 million into it? I forget what the number was, but something about that.
Well, just as a reminder, $3 million projects, I think generally would be carried in our debt capital budget. That's a part
Within
of our
the
annual
levy limit.
budget. Yeah, within the levy limit,
Yeah.
whereas 5 million would be a trigger that would normally have a debt exclusion vote, and that was a part of our
Yeah.
consideration.
I think that's key.
all right, good clarification, and thank you for the discussion. So I'm hearing affirmation that we concur with staying with the $5 million limit. Thank you. Next recommendation is to identify projects beyond the current 5-year plan up to 10 years through a needs assessment. And my note is to see the TBA report for the options. So the TBA report is a draft report. It does have, I do have it on my desktop. I don't know if anyone has taken the time to look at it after
will.
Stephen circulated it.
Yeah.
Would you like me to share it? Well, I'm going to share it for a minute.
I have it somewhere to find it.
Let's see if I can. I'm sorry, you have to see my cluttered desktop. It's like, oh, where is it? Wait a minute. I don't know if I can get to it if I don't have. Maybe I can't do it. Well, sorry.
My understanding was a TBA report got up to basically outlining several different
Thank you.
options of approaching these facility needs, and kind of left it at that.
Yep. Well, I think it's actually, it's quite a nice report. It analyzed tiers of work, which I think is important. So I'm just going to scroll down through it. Stephen, you know this much better than I do, but
Yeah, I mean, I think it identified really its needs assessment, not only from a standpoint of individual building needs, but also town needs. And it kind of looks at, you know, what structures do we have, and it kind of lays a roadmap. It's a voluminous report, and it is still in draft form. And as I've said publicly several times, it is a specific piece of work that has been set aside during the pandemic. And actually, when we do pick it back up and start looking at it again, I do think our view of it is going to be altered by the pandemic. But it just, you know, I would say it is a draft, but the background data on most of the buildings is good. And that's really the most significant part of the report. We hadn't really gone through the full-on prioritization exercise beyond the prioritization I did for the select board back in the fall of 2019, which was 5 years ago.
thank you. Parashar.
Please. So I guess I kind of view the question generically, and maybe is that the right approach? If you go back to your slide, I mean, are we thinking that a recommendation coming out of the task force would be that, as a matter of policy, that the capital plan be on a 10-year horizon? Because if that's the question, I think the answer should be yes. And then, you know, leave it up to the town manager and the school superintendent, whoever's in charge the first time around, to pull that together. And then again, consensus as to how often that ought to be updated. But it's kind of hard for us to sit here, I think, and decide what input should go into that 10-year horizon scan.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I think the 10-year thing is in our charge, isn't it?
It is.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think it should be a 10-year plan, but that's what, depending on the process, our recommendation is going to be a process, I think. Not a set of projects.
Right.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that I think we're in violent agreement about this.
Can we go back to that slide, but
To the
one where we got hung up?
yeah.
If I, yeah. There we
This
go.
one, yeah.
Yeah, so I agree that the 10-year, you know, even though you may not have a whole lot of specificity, things get more specific as they get closer and closer, and that 10 years is a good time to start at least getting some idea of what's happening. Now, this phrase here, needs assessment. I know what a needs assessment is, but what's that saying there? That needs clarification.
Well,
Actually,
It needs assessment. What does that mean? I mean, I know what it means, but why is it there? What's it trying to say?
actually, before we get to that, I want to ask a related question. This entire bullet point, I'm really not sure why the bullet point is on there at all. Like, when you look at this whole slide, okay, our task force is going to recommend what the definition of a very large project are. And we're going to recommend that we have project evaluation criteria and a preferred capital planning option. I don't know what we're recommending in the second bullet.
Well, I think we're recommending that we identify projects.
Right, that's not in our
Yes.
charge. We're not
Mhm.
supposed to identify any projects.
Well, that's what I was getting
No.
at. So I think
But
if
that's,
that's,
go ahead.
well, I thought the question was, should it be for only 5 or 10 years? Stephen clarified that it's in our charge, that it will be 10 years.
No, no, our charge is that we have a process that every year there's a process that puts together a 10-year template. But our job is not to identify the projects. in
No,
here.
I agree. So by definition, the time horizon is 10 years, is what Steve said.
Right,
Said that. So to your point, maybe it's not even an option. The fact that it's in our charge, it's 10 years, period.
right.
But shouldn't we kind of, reiterate that recommendation or confirm that recommendation?
Yes, so I think that this is here too, as a reminder that the charge is 10 years. We talked about identifying projects over a 10-year cycle based on a needs assessment, such as the TVA report.
Okay. is
But
that-
however, I think that to Terry's point, we could say that actually this is should be a sub-bullet to adopt the project evaluation criteria. So the needs assessment would be part of the evaluation criteria for identifying projects, timing them, prioritizing them, sizing them, etc.
That's fine. And actually, I think I understand now. My confusion is the term identifying projects. I think I understand now that this second bullet is really confirming that the process should be a 10-year horizon.
Right.
That phrase identifying projects, I thought you meant that our group was,
Oh, no.
right. That's what really confusing me. I think we should take out that identifying projects phrase and just say confirm 10-year horizon.
Fine. Okay.
Or the capital planning process should be identifying. But obviously, we're not, no.
Okay. Then we did, our next bullet is to adopt a project evaluation criteria. We do have a draft of this. I guess my question is, shall we refine it? Shall we describe it instead of trying to fix criteria? How would this group like to proceed with this?
Do you have a slide showing
Thank
draft?
you for asking. Yes, I do.
Whoop, pass
Maybe
it.
I passed it. Yeah, see if I can get back to it. Please.
Okay.
So from my standpoint, this list of evaluation criteria is good. And it gives a sample of the kinds of criteria, but it is not all inclusive. So I think that I would call these examples of evaluation criteria. I do think that the ones that are linked to the language of the Sustainable Concord Plan are pretty good. I mean, we vetted that with Kate Hanley, so I think that maybe those could exist. But perhaps there will be other criteria. So we might describe this evaluation criteria list as a minimum and allow other criteria to be added to it. It may be that the schools and the town decision makers would like to see additional criteria in this list, might be helpful to them. So
So
those are my thoughts.
you said proposed project evaluation criteria. That kind of does allow over time changes to be made, I would say.
Why don't we just clarify that with a footnote and just say, these are sample criteria. The decision makers at the time may add additional criteria. or something like that.
I mean, we could have this in the report and then have a little paragraph or a couple paragraphs, explanatory paragraphs associated with that.
Mhm.
I have a basic question, and it relates a little bit to some of the suggestions here. Is our expectation that if the school has a 5 million plus project, or the town has a 5 million plus project, that at some point the school or the town is evaluating the project against these criteria, and it would be reported out in some form or fashion? I see nodding of heads, et cetera. And so let me just continue. If that's an expectation, I think we should maybe think a little bit about where in the process one would want to see that, number one. And number two, if you put in language that said these are recommended or suggested, or they can be modified, no disrespect intended, Stephen, but if you decide you don't like these 15 and I only want 3, what would do we want to grant that level of flexibility or not? We ought to think a little bit, I think, carefully about to what extent we want to grant it. And on the flip side, Frank, are these too many, and are they all appropriate for all projects? So I think we need to maybe perhaps think about a few things that might be common across virtually any 5 million plus project, and others that might be necessary in the context of the project. Give some flexibility to the folks without leaving so much flexibility that nothing gets evaluated according to what this committee would like to see evaluated. I don't know if that made sense or not.
Well, I don't think these criteria should or are intended to be exclusionary. Like if you don't, score 10 on every single one of these 10, your project doesn't go ahead. I don't think that's
No, that's not what I meant.
rational.
My question, Carl, is if a project is not even evaluated against any of these criteria, and the criteria is, will it please, I'm being ludicrous, but will it please 80% of the residents? If that's the only criteria, are we comfortable with that and the fact that none of these other criteria were used? That's just a question I'm asking.
So can I comment on that? Yeah, I think, I seem to recall that we went through the project evaluation criteria and put together this list to demonstrate what types of things the people making the decision on prioritization should be looking at as they make those evaluations. This list is too long, but we wanted to throw a bunch of options in there for consideration. But there should be a fixed set of criteria, not a variable set of criteria. And so, like I said, it's all pretty straightforward stuff. And that's how the report out would be. The people who are drafting the capital plan, whether it's me or committee or somebody else, should look at each project and ask these types of questions. But there should be, like I said, I thought the discussion was the task force didn't view its role as determining the criteria, but recommending that there should be a criteria, project evaluation criteria, and these are examples. But at the end, the final product for whatever the outcome is of this process should be a fixed list of criteria.
So thank you. That's a good summary. I think the other aspect to that conversation that I'd like to reinforce was that our early conversations were that a set of criteria would give a systematic vantage point to the projects that were coming, that were being queued up,
Mhm.
so that there would be a system in place to evaluate where our expenditure, how our expenditures were being made, and could we gain benefit in multiple arenas from those expenditures.
Yeah.
So we could continue on with this set of proposed criteria with a more extensive description of
Yeah, I think it
importance
needs
of
that.
the set of criteria.
And Stephen, so Stephen, from what you're saying, you would think that once the committee puts forward recommendations and these are suggestions, then some other entity or the schools or towns would independently actually pull together the criteria? Is that what you're kind of thinking?
Yeah. You know, we're gonna talk about the enhanced process. Maybe the school and town administrations agreeing on a set of project evaluation criteria as a part of that process.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
I have a question about that. Does that mean in year one, the decision makers might pick, let's say, the first 3 bullets on our list, and then in year 2, there's different decision makers and they pick the last 3 bullets? Or are we saying that every year they're supposed to use the same set of criteria?
Every year they should be using the same set of criteria. And not to say that we're gonna get these in 2 stone tablet form, but generally they should be using them consistently.
Then it's probably our job. Maybe we need 2 lists, like a proposed set of sample criteria, this broad list, and then we need another list that's like, these are the minimum things. Or maybe on this list, certain ones have an asterisk or something that say, these ones have to be considered every year. Because I do agree with Stephen. I don't want to see the criteria change every single year. They have to be, about the same every year.
Well, so that goes to what I was suggesting, Terry. Maybe what we do is we have one group that's called core,
Right.
and then we list those as the recommendations. And then you've got another group that says, optional depending on project type or something, and you could have those.
Perfect.
And then to Stephen's point, this is our recommendation, and then perhaps the school and the towns get together and kind of say, yeah, you know what, we agree with these, or they may tweak them, but you then end up with a concept of a core and then optional depending on the project.
Right. I like that.
Okay, so we maybe are going to come back and do some more work on criteria.
I just want to make one really quick comment for when we get to the template later. You'll see there's a column that says, has this project been evaluated with the criteria? And it's a yes or no checkbox.
Yeah, good. The feedback loop. Thank you. All right, and so our last bullet here is to implement the preferred capital planning option as our recommendation. And the preferred option that we've been discussing has been the enhanced option. So this slide is back to the needs assessment, reviewing it annually. The criteria we discussed. This is the preferred capital planning option.
I'm sorry, can you back up to the 2 prior? I had a question.
Of course, sorry.
No?
To this?
Yeah, so what is, I'm not exactly sure what non-building infrastructure refers to.
Roads and sewers and
Great.
water and,
So we might say IE or something, because
Okay, we could explain that.
And land purchases.
horizontal infrastructure.
And also, but it might be land purchases too.
So I think that that is the third bullet, Terry. Identify strategic parcels, buildings for possible municipal purchase and use.
Because I keep thinking about NMI StarMet, and
Yeah.
Okay.
it should, I'm not sure how specific we should be, or, maybe that's part of the criteria of, potential.
Well, so don't you think that these would capture StarMet?
Yes, now that you've explained it to me. I'm just trying to think,
Okay.
because I almost thought, does that mean systems within the buildings? I wasn't exactly sure.
Yeah.
Building.
So I would say that systems within buildings would be part of the built environment.
Yeah,
And you might argue that horizontal construction is part of the built environment also. But
sure, okay.
roads, sewers,
So as part of the report, I would think we'd probably put a little more.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't call it necessarily horizontal because a cell tower could be an example of that, and that's.
Well, it's just a way of, differentiating
Now I understand you
the
explained
way
it.
the state does it.
Yep.
much of our non-building infrastructure is in the enterprise fund realm.
Mhm.
And the enterprise fund projects are not coming up into this capital planning project effort. These, our capital planning considerations have to do with non-enterprise, non-rate paid projects.
Got you. Okay.
Okay, so, but the TBA analysis, that a building assessment analysis, does have a number of options built into it.
Mhm.
So when the town and the school think in the future about projects that may come up in the next 10 years, there are a number of scenarios that show up in the TBA architect's report, for example, that would enable a project to be defined.
Mhm.
What would not show up in that is the opportunistic land or building purchases that would just come up opportunistically. Okay, we're good. Should we move forward? Hello, Laurie. Thank you for joining us.
Hi there. Sorry I'm late.
Nope, thanks for fitting us in today. So the preferred capital planning option that we have been talking about has been the enhanced, modified, current capital planning process. And Stephen and Laurie had a conversation, and maybe I should give you the chance to talk to this task force about the bullets that show here.
Sure, I think the big thing in trying to be responsive to in defining this enhanced process and being responsive to the feedback that we've been getting, throughout, and really what I perceive to be the raison d'etre for this committee being in existence. I hope I said that right. It really came down, at least in my mind, I think, and I'm not going to speak for Lori, but I think she shares this view, that there's a perception or there's a reality that large projects, town large projects and school large projects were being pushed forward by their respective sponsors without consideration or collaboration with each other, with the two sides of the house, if you will, talking to each other. And so I don't think a committee necessarily solves that issue, because if there was a freestanding committee, the town could still try and push its projects through and the schools could push their projects through. I think what we really want is a structured, built-in collaboration process. And so what I think makes the most sense is, the capital planning process would start with the town and the school administrations getting together and reviewing. I mean, it would be a review of all projects, but especially tier 3 projects. And then we would identify the tier 3 projects, prioritize them, and put together a timing / debt sequencing schedule of them. And we would look out 10 years for that. We would then jointly present that information to a joint meeting of the select board and school committee, and sometimes do it with the finance committee as a kind of a trilateral meeting. We have a very large finance committee in terms of membership, and so sometimes you can do it with just a couple, like the chair and an observer present to express, to speak on behalf of the finance committee without necessarily having it be the full committee, but that's an optional consideration. And then we would, like I said, review the priorities that would be agreed upon, and the debt sequencing. So those two committees would be hearing this information the same way at the same time. Excuse me. And then we would then have a template that would summarize those projects, in the context of the project evaluation criteria. So if public safety, I don't know that the middle school would fall into this process at this point because it's got its own committee. But if we look at the public safety complex as kind of the next one up, we would have it, does the public safety complex reduce greenhouse gases? Did we look at alternatives? And we would present each project, which is why that list is too long, because it would be difficult to get through all that. But you would say, does it hit these 5 or 6 or 7 criteria, and how does it kind of rank in that criteria? So then we would present all of that, and then each year the capital requests would I think mostly follow that plan. There are times, as we've said many times, opportunistic purchases, whether it's land or something else, system failures that redraw the prioritization list in unexpected ways. Those types of things are still going to happen, but generally the plan would follow this prioritization that we have described here through this enhanced process.
So it was suggested in one of our meetings recently that there should be a schedule attached to this enhanced process. And so if we were to attach a schedule to it, what would you and Laurie recommend?
So the meeting between the town and the school administrations would take place sort of at the outset of the capital planning process. And then some amount of time, maybe a couple of weeks or a month after that internal process has started, we would then have the joint meeting. Kind of, I guess I'm not exactly sure what slot we would plug it into, but it would be folded into the town meeting process. We have our preview meeting, we've got public hearings. I mean, there's a lot of built-in processes as we get towards town meeting. I think that this would be baked into that in some way, shape, or form. The exact timing of it, I think it's too soon to say that, but it would definitely be run concurrently. I mean, we have a capital planning process now, and it is on a schedule now. This would just be part of that capital planning process, but the joint meeting would be something that would happen probably around the same time. It would probably have to happen before the public hearings for town meeting. So at the public hearing, the committees could articulate their view of the projects. I don't know, Lori, if you have a different timeline. I just kind of made that up as I went, but I don't know if you have a different view of the timeline.
Parashar, 1 moment.
No, I think that makes the most sense. I just want to state it's not all that different than the way, at least from the school side, we have to go through finance committee and select board anyhow with any warrants we bring. So I feel like there was there's been similar discussions, maybe not with a joint meeting, which I do think is a different level to bring it to vet this stuff as we go. So, I'm debating, is it part of the town meeting process or is it actually off cycle of that? So we all stay synced up before we're even ready to propose a warrant article, that people know what's on the radar. Or maybe,
Yeah.
So timing could be up for discussion. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's because right now we're operating on 5-year plans, and I don't think there's a tier 3 project on our 5-year plan. This is at this point.
So I'm confused. Are we talking about our charge to talk about very large project capital planning?
Yes,
Mhm.
So first of all, we're talking about a 10-year plan, correct?
Yeah.
right.
I would propose that it definitely should be off cycle.
Yeah, I think that makes best sense.
Yeah.
So Parashar, you had a comment.
The current 5-year capital plan and our charge.
Yeah, no, Cynthia, I think raised the same point I was going to. So if this is a 10-year plan, and Stephen and Lori, if that's kind of what you meant here to align with the 10-year time horizon, then I would think it could and maybe probably works better if it's off cycle, so that all the stakeholders have a pretty good sense of what the 10-year looks like. And then as the projects come up within the time frame where you're starting to think about warrant articles, then as you said, it can be worked into the regular process, but at least folks will have had some sense that something's coming along.
Well, I think the only issue is, maybe I'm not hearing you guys correctly, but that sounds like 2 processes, because our 5-year capital planning process is going to be converted through this to a 10-year capital planning process, but the mechanics of it are going to be essentially the same, except for project evaluation criteria and some of these other built-in these new features that are going to be a part of it, and so that has to be in cycle.
No. Stephen, we do not have very large projects in this 5-year capital plan right now.
Not right now, no.
No, so I think we should keep this process the same. And yes, I think we need a new process. Absolutely.
Stephen,
Can I just say, this has come around, I guess, through the last meeting and so on, and definitely as it's presented here as a process that is basically wholly in the town, in the hands of our wonderful town government and our wonderful school administration, and a wonderful select board. But I think that part of the problem that has shown up is that the citizens don't really know and have a handle on this capital planning, whatever, whether it's 5-year or whatever. And I'm very reluctant to support a planning option that does not include citizen public input. And I really, I think that when we were talking about it on the finance committee a few years ago, I think the concept was that there would be a standing committee. I know, we somehow seem to have just tossed that out the window. I mean, we were looking at them both as options, whatever, back when we gave our presentation, but somehow that the idea of a standing committee has been knocked down, and I don't think I can support an option that doesn't have a standing committee that has citizen members on it.
Okay, thank you. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Parashar?
So, Stephen, I think you made an important clarification, at least in my mind, that you were envisioning taking the current process for, in essence, tier 2 projects and morphing it into this modified, enhanced process for both tier 2 and tier 3 projects, and that it then would be a 10-year look at least for the horizon scan. And if that's what the proposal is, Elise, I would suggest that up front we kind of clarify that that's what we're thinking about, right? Because, and even though I know the recommendation was for tier 3, it sounds like the school and the administration and town would like to merge the two, which I personally think is a good idea, frankly, because it simplifies everything. But if that's the case, we ought to put that up front and recognize that that was something that they recommended. And, you know, if ultimately we agree, we agree. And in that context, then I would, you know, then I think it does make sense maybe for Stephen and Lori to come back and say, okay, if that's the case, and Carl's point, we need to make sure that there's appropriate venues for public input. Here's the schedule and here are the points we can identify for public input, right? And I recognize in today's process, there's plenty of opportunities for public input. So don't take that the wrong way, right? Folks can attend a lot of meetings and provide input, but maybe we just explicitly identify those.
So I think that your point and Carl's point is good, that we, in this description of this process, modified process, does not address public input, even though it's, you know, read between the lines. There are joint meetings, they're all open meetings, they're all public meetings. So there obviously is opportunity for public input. But
Yeah, and just, Elise, can I just build on that point? I'm sorry.
okay, go ahead.
And Carl, and this, we discussed this a lot before, I think, Carl, before you came on. Carl, before you came on the committee, we did discuss this quite a bit, and there are built-in committee meetings as a part of this now that provide the exact same medium for public input as a standalone committee. The other part of this is generally tier 3 projects end up with their own committees, their own like project planning committees anyway.
That's fairly far along in the presence on the plan, though.
Yeah.
So I'd like to divert now for a moment and go and look at the pros and cons that we summarized for the standing committee. So
Are we still gonna, Elise, are we still gonna vote today on a preferred option?
that's my hope.
So I don't like this option, and I definitely think it should be off cycle. I think our under the levy limit capital planning process works very well. It's clearly defined, it's clearly understood. I think this other process should be off cycle and have its own life.
Its own thing, its own cycle, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so
Its own process, obviously, much of which is the existing,
okay, so
And I just want to add, in response to the comments about public input. Yes, we have a lot of meetings now that are open to the public, but I think what's happening is, let's imagine this joint meeting, okay? We have many people already attending. We've got 5 from the school committee, 5 from the select board. We've got several administrators. We've got at least 2 from the FinCom. And the public, it will be listed on the agenda at the end as public comment. I think there's a lot of frustration with that they don't feel that they're, I think we need to have a better way for the public to participate than just putting them at the end of a long agenda.
yeah. And I also think that that members of the public who, just like with the finance committee doesn't adopt the budgets, doesn't have veto authority or anything. Just that the finance committee is involved with the budgeting process all the way along, and its members have a build up a knowledge of what's in the budgeting process and what the different issues are, and then is able to make recommendations to the town meeting, as well as to the entities that are involved. And I think that's the benefit of having citizen participation on, that is dedicated to this particular process. In other words, a capital planning committee.
So, but I
So,
think, I
Terry,
don't,
Stephen, Terry, I'm not sure why the public input needs to come at the end of a regularly scheduled meeting. I was kind of frankly envisioning the way the words were written, that there'd be a meeting called with the joint bodies specifically to review the 10-year plan. And that would be the agenda item. So I'm not sure it needs to come at the end of a meeting. So I think there could still be plenty of opportunities for public input.
There could be, but having attended several of these joint meetings and seeing how many participants there are and how many people want to talk and how the chairman is trying to also keep time control, public input doesn't have to come last, but it does.
Okay, so I'd like to keep our meeting focused. And so we're not in the business here of discussing public comment and when it should come at a meeting, but we are in the business of discussing public input into the capital planning process. So let's please not divert to our the patterns that we have observed in our public meeting, and instead try to stay on point here. So
can I speak to that, Elise?
I beg your pardon?
Can I speak on that point?
All right.
Whether it's the the standing committee, the enhanced process presupposes committees and public forums as tier 3 projects develop, which happens on every tier 3 project currently. White Ponds, Giroux, middle school, like they all have either their own committees or they have multiple public forums to explain the project. Because like I said, these are very large projects. There's going to be tons of citizens engagement on them because it's likely we're going to need a debt exclusion vote. So I think to say that the enhanced process precludes public participation ignores all of the public participation that we've seen in real time go along with very large tier 3 projects. What the enhanced process does is fill what I think is the gap that I perceived of collaboration and coordination on these very large projects between the town and the schools. And again, I think now that we're in these slides, that's one of the things that I know, well, based on my experience, I don't think the capital planning committee gets you that.
I think
Thank
what
you.
the committee does is it brings the public into the process, not just as observers and, at the end of as we say, at the end of the meeting or whatever, you can hold up your hand and say something, but as, in a sense, participants, again, similar to the way that the finance committee works. The finance committee participates in the process. Maybe a real pain in the neck for the school committee and as a result, the finance committee has an understanding of what the issues are and is in a position to make recommendations. And especially something like capital planning, which is a long range thing. It's, we're looking at this as an entity that develops over years, that there be some continuity to it, and so on, which you do get with these committees where you have people, serving terms and then, the overlap of the terms and that sort of thing.
So I wonder if part of the interest in a capital planning standing committee is this bullet. Everyone would clearly understand who vets the projects and when. So Carl, I'd like to know if you're arguing for a citizen committee so that it is the citizens who vet the projects as opposed to the town manager and school administration. And
well, ultimately the citizens do vet the project.
They do at
town meeting. So, don't you want people to, you talk about buy-in, and one of the great benefits of public participation in these processes, and it's been proven time and time again, is that if you don't involve the public and then you drop something on them, you'll get a lot of opposition. But if you bring people along, then you get more support.
Yes, and so I think that the work that this group has done on this enhanced process has sought to address those issues, has sought to make the process clear, efficient, and effective. And so
The process that was outlined in the enhanced process is clear and efficient, and
so
but it just misses this thing that I think has been missing in the capital planning in Concord.
So I guess if we were going to support the enhanced process, I guess I would like to think together about how we could be more specific, very specific about citizen participation. And as opposed to calling it public comment, which we all have, lightning rod reactions to. But the citizen participation is what I think we're trying to get at with the enhanced process, as opposed to establishing yet another gatekeeping committee, such as a standing committee for capital planning, which in fact might make our process less efficient. Terry.
I completely agree. I think that is the key thing that's been missing. And to Stephen's point, yes, there's plenty of public participation once a project is chosen. For example, we're far enough down with the middle school now that there's a committee that meets, there's public participation with that. But our process that we're trying to figure out now is before a project is chosen, before it's prioritized, the public wants to weigh in on which is project number 1, 2, or 3. And that's what we have to solve.
Okay, Carrie.
So the CPC committee on an annual basis vets projects. They have a set process that they follow. They have a lot of public participation. So maybe they are an example of what we could follow here. And if I could make one comment against having a standing committee, my concern would be that having a standing committee isn't going to eliminate the need and interest that the school committee and the finance committee and the select board have in hearing these projects as well. And so I think it just would be very complicated. So I think doing something with an enhanced process, following something similar to what CPC does, would make the most sense here.
Thank you. Parashar.
Yeah, Elise, I would tend to agree a little bit with what Carrie said as well. But I think the other thing, at least I find helpful, is kind of envisioning what product might come out in the very first year. And I think, as we've already heard, there are very few and far between tier 3 projects. So if I understand our discussion so far, the first year might be, Concord's first 10-year plan, if you will, likely gonna not have anything, I think, maybe in the first 5 years, but at the back 5 years, there may be a list of potential projects that might come. Maybe it's prioritized, maybe it's not. And then as the years progress, it gets updated and some of those from the back 5 start filtering up, offering, I think, multiple opportunities at different points for input. But on the flip side, we'd have to actually make sure we can get members to participate in a standing committee. And given the pace of the slow pace of change, I don't know how many members we can get from the public to participate. And in essence, for a committee that may not have a ton of sort of tangible movement year in and year out. So that's why I think, and it would also, some of the points raised earlier, duplication, et cetera, I think could also play a factor, which is why I think I would favor the enhanced project. Let's make it a little bit more clear. Identify opportunities for public participation, input, whatever we want to call it, and see how that goes. We can always stand up a committee. It's always harder to undo a committee later, from my experience.
Stephen,
So, yeah, I think, and I think I want to make sure I am tracking the point correctly, but, Carrie mentioned CPC as an example of a committee citizen committee that reviews projects. I mean, those aren't very large, they're smaller, but they don't prepare project applications. They don't decide what the needs are. They decide on the projects presented to them. They don't generate the project, and that's still going to remain an administrative function. Citizens aren't going to say, we need a roof on, a town building. Those are always going to be generated by the administration. That's what we do. And again, I think and this is, like I said, tier 3 projects, $5 million and over, heading towards debt exclusion. If you really play out in your mind how those get developed, it's, like I said, nearly always a project-based committee that does get formed pretty early in the process. There may be a need identified and then kind of framed out, and then a committee would come along, or there would be, like in the case of White Pond, a number of public forums and project charrettes and things like that. If you have a freestanding, and I've been through this, if you have a freestanding capital planning committee, and then a project committee gets formed for a very large project, it turns into who's in charge of this, who's supposed to be reviewing and evaluating this. And that's why, because we're really talking about very large projects, a freestanding committee isn't going to be able to, I think, I suppose they could, but they're going to end up being the special project committee for every single project. And that would then exclude the involvement of other citizens who really are interested in that specific project, because then they can't get on the project committee. Do you follow what I'm saying?
yep. Yeah, so I think that
I don't think it necessarily has to be. Go ahead.
Carl, I'm sorry. Do you want to?
Well, I just don't think that a capital planning committee would have to exclude, first of all, a project committee, or even if there is a continuing interest in that project, it could be just one member of the capital planning committee kind of just goes along with,
So
project.
I think that in view of this conversation, I do not think we should vote today. I think that we need to give more attention to not only the process in describing the process and the citizen participation in the process, but we also need to give attention to responsibility and authority. So where responsibility and authority lies, and how we will define a process that will not thwart the avenues of responsibility and authority that we have, but will in fact enhance it, for an overused word. So let's see. So we're not going to vote. So before I take, okay, Terry, yes.
To that point, yeah. The way I was visualizing how we could do it without a capital committee and avoid the problem that Stephen just mentioned of butting heads and who's in charge. Getting to your point, at least, about the responsibility and authority, the way I visualized this was if we looked at the template, which we might do later, it addresses Parashar's question of what the first year and every year might look like with hypothetical projects in it. And that this would be done first by the decision makers and shown at the joint meeting. The public would have input, and then anything that was selected at that meeting would go on to have its own special project committee. So in other words, nobody's butting heads. There's no special project committee yet until after the joint meeting where they say, yes, go ahead with project XYZ.
Thank you. So I've not managed our time very well today and have given you and Carrie 0 minutes to discuss your template. So we could look at the template now and before I take our end of the meeting public comments. The template was forwarded to everyone. Do you have it, or would it benefit? Should I try to share it on my screen? Would you like to share it on your screen, or shall we
Okay, there it is.
talk about it from?
Problems. Yeah, I have it right here.
Okay. Terry, what do you think would be most effective?
Did you say Terry or Carrie?
Yeah, Terry and Carrie, what do you think would be most effective?
I think in less than 5 minutes, anybody can share the screen. I can do it, or Carl, or whoever, and I think it'll take 3 minutes.
All right, let's see if I can get to it.
So we already discussed it once.
Yeah, I know. Can you easily share your screen?
Yes, I think so.
Or can Carrie?
Um, Okay, share screen. There it is. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Okay, so we looked at this last time and Carrie did all the work on it. Thank you, Carrie. Basically, the suggestion was in column E, the total cost column, we have the dollar amount for the project. But then the other columns, starting at column J, those are the debt service costs for the median household. So I just want to walk through some hypothetical projects. So the middle school, if it was on, would be probably prioritized as project 1. Column D there, yes. The question is, has the criteria been checked? Yes. Estimated total cost, who knows, 100 million maybe. And these are the estimated debt service numbers on a 20-year bond. Hypothetical project A has been sequenced as number 4 because the criteria have not been checked yet. We think, wild guess, it's 45 million. That's not going to happen until FY30. Project B is important enough that it should come right after the middle school as soon as we can afford it. Yes, the criteria has been checked. It's 30 million. And here are our estimated debt numbers in household. Project C is way in the future. And so we put all the costs in this last column, future years. And project D is a 3-phase project about the size of White Pond and Giroux, 5 million. And so you see phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. And then we have some totals at the bottom. So I
Yeah,
went
that's
through
the
that
scary
really
part.
quickly. But that's right, Carl. That is the whole point of what the joint meeting would do. They would say, okay, let's look at this. Is this doable? Well, no, it's not. So let's push project B back 2 years, or yes, it is doable, or whatever. And that's where citizens need to have input, and a public discussion needs to occur before project B even gets started. They don't have a committee yet to build this thing because it hasn't even been approved yet by the enhanced process.
Great. Well, very helpful, I think. I appreciate the work that you both have done on this. What do people think about it? Do you think this is a tool that will be
Yeah.
effective?
Yep.
And
No, it's scary. It's effective. Yep.
what's missing from this? Maybe nothing.
Nope. Real data.
Oh, that, okay.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
Well, we don't want to put real data in. We want to show the
No,
type,
no, I was
right,
not asking for it. I was just.
right, right. We want to show the type of template that would be discussed at this enhanced process public meeting.
Yeah.
Good.
I think by doing this, this does solve or deal with one of the issues that we anticipated coming along a couple of years ago with the multiple projects and so on.
So this is Prash. I think that's good. And again, I would urge us, to focus not just on a public meeting, but point out in our ultimate report that we're doing this to provide visibility throughout the process, not just to the public, but to FinCom and other stakeholders, et cetera. And at the end of the day, you have in one place, presumably you've got the spreadsheet, but there's, Word document or something that has a description of all the projects, that has some sense of what the outcomes are. Versus currently it's in a hodgepodge, several different places. So that's the other thing that hopefully we can make sure we build in there is this notion of unifying this and putting it all in one place. And presumably if it's the select board and the school committee, whomever else to whom, that is to whom Stephen and Lori are presenting next year, 2 years later, they then can take that public input and ultimately provide some guidance to tweak it, et cetera. And then when necessary, as you go down, follow the process to get whatever needs to be put into the warrants following the process that we have today. Is that kind of what we're envisioning as the enhanced project or process?
So that's why I think it should be off cycle, because as Stephen said, once you start coming up to the deadline for the project, you will have to do something way before a town meeting if it's such a very large project. So it's probably most appropriate. It's not going to be part of that year's FY24.
Yes.
And we're just going to say,
There's no point in having it.
Yes, I agree, Cynthia. It's not something that happens within 3 months.
no.
Yeah.
It may be a good idea to release some sort of a report timed with the information that goes out for town meetings, such as I don't know whether it's stepping on toes, but if it were part of the finance committee report or something like that, just that every year there's an update
Mhm.
of the capital plan.
Yes, it needs to
Good.
be updated every year. That's right.
Right.
So maybe the summer is the time when this has to be done.
Yeah.
Maybe
No,
not
it's
today,
not.
but we should specify in our final report that, every year it should be tweaked by, September 1 or whatever it is.
Oh, yeah, and that's why I think recommending maybe Stephen and Lori go back and think a little bit about the calendar. I think Stephen, you laid out something off the top of your head, but maybe kind of refine it and say, hey, this is the timing that we think could work in an enhanced project, I think would be good.
Yeah, I mean, if what we're talking about is just presenting the tier threes as standalone things,
Mhm.
then I completely agree with you, Cynthia, and others, that it should be something that has its own special snapshot, because there aren't that many of them, and they're not gonna pop up all that often. I was concerned that it was the regular capital planning process that we have plus tier threes. But I do think that given the importance of the projects and the size, significance, and relative infrequency, they can be split out. But just remember, the presentation isn't going to be, it's time for a public safety complex. Let's schedule a special town meeting for a debt exclusion vote. It starts with, we need to bring on an architect to do a needs assessment and a feasibility study for a new public safety complex for $100,000 or $500,000 or whatever that amount is. That, and then the next year you update, here's what we found. So you have to remember the evolutionary process of these projects. It goes before a bunch of people throughout the community. That's where these early steps do generate tons of citizen engagement.
So Stephen, I'm wondering, and Elise, maybe your thoughts and others obviously, but you raise a good point. I'm kind of wondering whether it would be helpful not only for us, but in the report to help make this come alive. Maybe you say, okay, here's a process that we're recommending. And then you have an example of a project that goes from being on this list the first year that's in year 7, and then the next year it's in it's now year 6, and kind of when you would envision it merging with going to warrant, just as an example, not in a lot of detail, but so people can kind of visualize how you would envision this process working and coming alive.
A case study.
Something like that.
Okay.
Because otherwise I think we're just talking in hypotheticals and et cetera, but this would give us something grounded for us to see and see the calendar, think about how it might work over a 3 or 4 year period.
Great.
Because eventually they're going to come, it's going to come, to your point, we're going to need a warrant, and then it gets merged with kind of the regular process, if you will, right?
Right. Yep, exactly. And our annual cadence of town meeting is a very strong drumbeat. And so I think that is another reason to decouple this from the annual town meeting cadence. So one fast question before we take public comment. Can this task force imagine that there is a warrant article that we would want to propose? Does anybody think we need a warrant article?
Well, I think if you're gonna have a standing committee, you would want one, but
Not necessarily.
that may not be happening.
You wouldn't need a warrant article to create a standing committee,
Well, yeah, okay.
but you're suggesting it might be useful to have it in order to discuss it in a public forum?
Yeah, I mean, we're not looking for an appropriation or a bylaw change or anything
No,
like that. So
right.
I don't see a warrant article emerging out of this discussion. I do see, well, town meeting, I think, again, is going to be somewhat limited on time, like the last one, because it's going to be a 1-day Sunday session outside, again, June 13th. But maybe in the public hearings, we could maybe get a little bit of time at the end to kind of present after we've presented to the select board, maybe. I know that, the middle school building committee is looking at some of the town meeting processes as an opportunity to engage with the public about how that project is evolving. And I think we could certainly take a snapshot of what we've done and present that during, at one of those sessions.
All right, great. So are there any members of the public that would like to make a comment?
I don't think we have any.
We have no public members yet.
No.
Okay. Then fine. Then I'll give task force members a chance for parting shots before we.
So at least I'll take one.
All right.
I think you should be in charge of meetings for all boards because you're running this process pretty efficiently.
As long as we don't have content issues, we're fine, right? Yeah.
I second that.
Thank you. Thank you. Carl, any parting shots?
No, I think I've, raised some issues. I guess the one about if we were to adopt the Mass General Law that sets up capital planning committees, that may be a town meeting. I don't know whether that's necessary.
Okay, well, we should look at that then and
Yeah.
see. All right. Carrie, anything? Any parting shots?
No, thank you.
Laurie,
No, thank you.
Cynthia,
I just have, what are we looking at for our next meeting? Not time or date, agenda.
it will probably be a similar agenda. I would say a refined description of the enhanced process. We didn't drill down into the pros and cons of the standing committee, so we put that on the agenda as well. Maybe we'd look at that first. And then I'm going to try to take a vote on the recommendations because A vote would allow us to then send to the finance committee our recommendations and ask for their input. And it would tee us up to confirm an outline of our report and assign sections to everybody so we could actually document what we've been up to.
And if we have, I'd like to send you some refinements for discussion for the enhanced process.
Okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right. Terry?
Yeah, I think today's discussion was really, really useful. So I think that would be great to continue next time. And I think there's, when we talk about the pros and cons of the standing committee, I think we're still kind of fuzzy on the enhanced option. Particularly, I think we should continue discussing, I think that Stephen and I are looking at it two different ways a little bit, like in terms of the special interest or special project committee versus this process. What comes first, second? How does this work? I think we need to flesh that out some more.
So if you'd like to send me a note about that more clearly refines your point of view, that would be really helpful. Anybody?
Sure.
Stephen, did I give you a chance for a parting shot?
Mine was going to be motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, any objections? All right, thank you all very much. Appreciate your input.
Thank you, Elise.
Okay, enjoy the snow.
Same to you. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks a lot.